Hello everyone, we are live from the PCB West 2025 show floor with David Schild, Executive Director of the Printed Circuit Board Association of America. I swear every time we're at a PCBAA conference, I got to run into this guy. He's doing so much for the industry, and it's great to have you here talking
Zach,
today.
It's good to see you. This is the fourth show I think that we bumped into each other at. What I'm thrilled about is that every time I'm here, we have more members in PCBAA. This show and the job that these guys at PCBAA are doing are just incredible, right? It continues to grow every year. Attendance is up. And I also think there's more and more recognition that we've got to have some activities in Washington to benefit the industry.
Yeah. And you mentioned attendance is up. I know for a fact attendance is up this year at this show. We just met at PCB East recently this year, and that was at a new venue, which was larger than the previous venue.
Right.
So just from that, vendors and attendees are up, and then next year it's going to be in Worcester, which is even bigger. So the number of people just keeps going up and up and up for that show, as well as this show. And then you mentioned the membership in PCBAA. That's actually something I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
What is the membership picture looking like?
Well, it's both growth-oriented and it's diversified. So when we started, we had 5 board shops.
Okay.
4 years later, we now have more than 78 companies, and it's not just the board shops, it's all of their critical materials suppliers, it's folks in the test community, it's the assembly community, and now more recently, it's OEMs like Raytheon. And the reason for that is that everybody in the value chain, customers, suppliers, business partners, competimates, however you want to say it, they all understand that we need a strong and robust American market for printed circuit boards, and that's why they're joining the team.
So, how does this affect the perception of the organization when you go into Washington to talk to lawmakers? Because I think if you just had 5 board shops, they're probably not willing to listen to you. But when you got a name like Raytheon on your membership rolls, now they start paying attention.
You're exactly right. It's a huge asset. So many people in Washington are not engineers.
Right.
They are definitely not board designers. And so what they know is that we have to have Javelin missiles. They know we have to have a Columbia-class submarine. They understand that we have to have critical infrastructure parts that we can trust and rely on. And so you can point to our membership and say, all the people that bring modern life, all the people that make this technology possible, they're here. You've already helped out the semiconductor industry through the CHIPS Act. Now let's talk about the public policies that we need to create a secure, trusted, and reliable supply chain of printed circuit boards.
So how is that message translating into action for the American part of the printed circuit board industry?
Sure. So there's a lot of things we're doing, right? We don't put all of our oars on one side of the boat. What I would say right now is there is stuff inside the Pentagon, right? DPA funding is a big one. Section 851, the rule that says that we need to get foreign inputs out of our dual use and commercial off-the-shelf supply chains, right? Certainly a desire to make sure that as the Pentagon dreams about more interceptors, the Golden Dome program, that we can surge and meet the increased capacity that's necessary. And then outside of the 5-sided building, in that all-important commercial market, which has fallen so far off, as you know, inside the United States, we need to think big about what things are outside the ITAR fence that are still critical. The water and power grid, banking servers, medical devices. I don't think anybody wants to wake up and say we are entirely dependent on our largest global competitor. We are entirely dependent on supply chains that stretch across the Pacific to keep the lights on, to keep Wall Street powered, to build AI data centers as an example of an emerging technology. And so if we can get the government to pivot towards domestic sourcing and start to produce those all-important incentives that lead to demand signals, then I think we'll start to see commercial lines pop up right next to those defense lines.
Sure, yeah, and you know, for folks who work in the American, segment of the printed circuit board industry, I mean, it's been kind of lamented almost for quite a while that we're almost like government subsidized through the defense industry, and that's kind of what really drives the localized production. What has been the level of onshoring though that we've seen more for commercial products more broadly, due to, for example, tariffs, and then due to also kind of the unwinding of some global supply chains? Has that actually filtered back into the US in a meaningful way?
Well, it hasn't showed up in the PCB industry yet, but I use the semiconductor industry as a great example of how it has. Of course, the CHIPS Act was a $52 billion investment in making fabs in America. What people don't often realize is that has been matched and exceeded by $462 billion plus to date in private commitments for semiconductors. The reason is that once Uncle Sam is the guarantor, once the federal government has signaled that they want to invest in a certain industry, that they back a certain industry, private money, whether at Wall Street or private equity, it gets off the sidelines. The investment case is much more valid. What's the first question anybody is going to be asked when they want to open a new PCB line? Where is the customer? Where is the government? We need to send a signal that the government believes in reshoring certain critical segments, defense and commercial, and then I think you're going to see private investment.
Now, speaking of private investment, I think this is really important because if you look at where some of the private investment has gone in the past, it has gone over to China because they have the whole supply chain there. And it's not necessarily because, as Tim Cook said, they're not really a low labor cost country anymore. It's all the stuff that you need is right there. You can go right down the street from your PCB factory to get all the other subcomponents. So how close are we to replicating that here? Because if we've handled the chips, right, if you want to do investment in printed circuit board production capacity, you do it here in the US, your chips are down the street. What about all the other components?
You know, Zach, we used to do this with the American automotive industry, right? We would make wiper blades in Indiana, we would make transmissions in Ohio, we would put the car together in Michigan. And we can do the same thing with electronics. And I'm glad you brought up China because it's not an accident that they have these manufacturing ecosystems. It's the result of central planning and significant investment to the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars over the last 30 to 40 years. I said this summer in front of Congress that US companies are not losing to Chinese companies, they're losing to the Chinese government because that's who's decided that they want to own these technology verticals. If we're not careful, China plus one isn't going to mean the United States because from an industrial policy perspective, I'm very impressed with what the Vietnamese government, the Malaysian government, and the Thai government are doing to incentivize companies to move out of China onto their shores to do manufacturing. While the US Congress discusses and in some cases dithers, those other countries are seizing the opportunity. So there's not just a need to do something, there's a need to do something quickly.
Well, yeah, I would agree. And yeah, there's been a lot of investment also in other places like, Mexico. There's been investment in India. In fact, I was reading, I think it was last year, quite a few acquisitions in some of those areas. And so, yeah, the broadening out is definitely happening. What are some of the things that you would advocate for at the legislative level to help and push some of that investment into the U.S. and possibly into expanding existing fabrication capacity or building up something in greenfield?
There are a lot of things that we can do, and there's things that has been done already. Let's start with that. The Defense Production Act, right? In 2022, we said that printed circuit boards and IC substrates are a critical national security technology. That freed the Pentagon up to spend money. And of course, they understand that all their critical weapon systems rest on a foundation of microelectronics. So you've seen companies like Calumet, like GreenSource, like TTM receive DPA dollars to build UHDI capacity in the United States. We need to continue to fund the DPA. We need the Pentagon to execute and distribute those dollars for high-end PCB work. I would also say that we need incentives. That's why our bill, HR 3597, the PCBs Act, creates a grant program at the Department of Commerce and a tax credit, a very important demand signal tax credit, because it says to the purchasers of American-made PCBs and substrates, you get a 25% tax credit when you source domestically. It applies to existing and new business. So now, that equation that you're doing, should I source overseas where it's cheaper, or should I source in the United States where there's less risk and I feel better about maybe my counterparty? We're gonna make that math easy for you with a tax credit. So there's things that have been done that show we can do this, and there's legislative vehicles like that. The last thing I would say is that domestic sourcing requirements are another way that we can carve up the apple. We should talk about investing in America's new air traffic control infrastructure. We should talk about all the programs that the Department of Energy, the Department of Transportation, that need to be built out. And are we gonna build American infrastructure with American microelectronics, or are we gonna source that overseas? I think the attitude of this White House and the current Congress, or we can do more with American parts. We already do it with glass, we already do it with steel. Why aren't we doing it with microelectronics would be my question to those in power.
Sure. Now, I think, we have some manufacturers here that are from overseas, and we've been talking to them. And one thing that I've noticed from talking to some of those companies, and I've also even noticed in marketing material from these companies, is that, they're kind of using the tariffs that are in place right now as almost like a marketing tool, because they're basically saying, we'll help you manage those tariffs. We'll help you bring that business back overseas. What do you think is the problem with falling into that mode? Should someone go for that? Should they fall into that trap? Or should someone just ignore kind of that language about tariffs and just try and bring it back home?
Tariffs are one tool in the toolkit, and I would say that this administration is a big fan of using that tool. Now, of course, the uncertainty of tariffs creates opportunities and challenges within American microelectronics manufacturing. And it's difficult to know week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter what the effect of tariffs will be. That's why I'm an advocate for incentives like tax credits, because generally when they get built into the tax code, they're there not just for years, but for decades. And when I talk to manufacturing executives, they want business plans that last, not a quarter, but a quarter of a century. And so that's why I tend to favor incentives. But of course, all of our guys and gals are reacting to the tariff regime right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough not to. It comes up in the news so often. So how could you not react to that? And it seems like things on the legislative side move so slow compared to what happens on the executive side. You can take tariffs, put them on, take them off. But like you said, if you could get a tax credit in place, it can persist and you can actually do some level of business planning around.
Yeah, I remind our membership that the CHIPS Act from inception, right, to the time it was signed on the president's desk, that was almost a 6-year journey. And of course, that was SIA and some of the largest companies in the world advocating for that policy. And many times the CHIPS Act was on very thin ice, right? It almost fell apart. The deal kind of almost didn't work. And I'm glad that it did. And those factories are coming online. We need to be patient and we need to be persistent. And that's one of the reasons I'm so happy our team is growing, is because every new member is a dot on a map, a new member of Congress, a couple of senators who can advocate for us. As we get bigger, the chances for legislative success increase.
So that's a great segue into membership. I'm sure there are some folks out there who work at some companies who are not members of PCBAA. If a company or even an individual is interested in becoming a member of PCBAA, what do they need to do?
We are a big tent. We want more people in our ecosystem and on our team. The bigger we are, the greater the chance for success. So I would say visit us online at PCBAA.org. Follow us on social media. Contact me directly. Find me at a trade show. Our membership, I think, they're the best advocates for the value of being on this team. We do one thing. In Washington, we educate, advocate, and legislate for American manufacturers. And if that's something that you think would benefit your cause, we want you on the team.
That's a great message to end on. David, thank you so much for coming over to talk to us.
Good seeing you as always, Zach.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Okay.
Everyone that's out there watching, make sure to hit the subscribe button. You'll be able to see all of our podcasts directly from the PCB West 2025 show floor. We'll see you in the next video.